Now, let's talk about this meeting that President Trump had in the Oval Office with Zohran Mamdani, the self-described Democrat, socialist, and mayor-elect of New York. Give me a call, 888-971-7243. What did you expect to happen? What did you want to happen? Half of me wanted Trump to say, now see here, Sonny, wipe that smirk off your face. You can't fool me. I know BS when I see it. And by the way, that chair you're sitting in, guess who made it? Capitalists. The shoes you're wearing, guess who made it? Capitalists. The socks you're wearing, the underwear you're wearing, the tie you're wearing, capitalists, capitalists, capitalists. The vehicle or your means of transportation created by capitalists. The petrol or the electricity used in that vehicle created by capitalists. Part of me wanted Trump to say that, but I knew he wouldn't. And they were gracious, and they exchanged flattery. And I got to tell you something. Trump said something about him coming from nowhere, having been at 1% in the polls at one time, and then coming on to become the mayor of New York City. It's a big job, Trump said. Having briefly been a politician, having been around a lot of them, there is a mutual respect for people in the business, in the game. And Trump, like Mamdani, came out of nowhere. No one really gave him a chance of winning the nomination, let alone becoming president. And Trump mentioned that Mamdani, as I said earlier, was at 1.1% in the polls. And he stokes these veteran politicians like Cuomo, wins the nomination for Democrat, and then becomes the mayor of New York when just months earlier no one ever heard of this guy. Trump had a respect for that, and even pretty much said so. So that's part of it. The other part of it is this. Trump's a businessman. Trump knows there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And if you're offering free buses, someone's going to pay for it. The buses aren't going to magically appear there for free. They aren't going to be manufactured for free. They're not going to be delivered for free. They're not going to run on free petrol. The bus drivers are not going to drive for free. Someone is going to pay. Same thing with childcare. And Trump, having been in the housing business, knows darn well you cannot freeze the rent on 2 million New Yorkers without having adverse consequences, most notably deterring people from building new housing, which is exactly the whole point behind all of this. Deterring people from putting money into housing. There are 50,000 so-called ghost units as we speak. These are rental units that the landlords are simply not renting out because they cannot get a decent return on his or her money. So therefore, it is cheaper not to rent them out at all. And all this is going to do is create more so-called ghost units. And Trump knows that. So here's the deal. What I'll do is I'll flatter this guy. He'll do a bunch of stupid things that won't work. And then maybe, just maybe, reality will smack him in the face. And it might be an object lesson for these Democrats. The other thing is this. We just talked about this video, which we'll talk more about later on, where you had half a dozen Democrat lawmakers who used to be in the military, all but telling young men and women to defy Donald Trump. Now, they claim they weren't saying that, but they were. They weren't giving any specific example of an illegal order. When Jason Crow, the Democrat from Colorado, was on with Martha McCollum, we played that for you yesterday, she asked him several times, what specific order did Trump give that was illegal? And he couldn't do it. So Trump has been called a Nazi and a fascist and a dictator and a tyrant. Some of those things he was called by Mamdani. And here Trump is treating him civilly, treating him with respect. So maybe, just maybe, it is an object lesson for some of these Democrats who despise Donald Trump to the point where they're calling him Hitler and Nazi and fascist and this, that, and the other. Because you disagree with me on policy? Because you don't like my style? I'm a Nazi and I'm a fascist? Now, Trump, of course, did not call Mamdani today a commie, as he'd been calling him Mamdani the commie. He didn't say that either. But Trump says things with a wink and a nod. I told you before, a lot of what Trump says I just ignore as white noise. But these Democrats, some of them, are pathological in their hatred of the president. And they have caused a virus that is affecting much of this country. We've talked about that psychotherapist who was interviewed, and he said 75% of his patients are obsessed with Donald Trump. And he said it's not healthy. And he called it the top pathology in the country today. So maybe we can tone it down a little bit, and maybe the example that was set between these two leaders who disagree on virtually everything. They disagree on Israel, clearly. On Bibi Netanyahu being arrested if he sets foot on New York soil, clearly. Disagree about rent freeze, clearly. $30 minimum wage, clearly. Grocery stores being run by government, clearly disagreeing on all of this. But they were civil. Maybe, just maybe, the lesson might be learned to some of you hateful Democrats who aren't giving Trump credit for anything. Not for the borders. We were told for 4 years that either they were closed or that they were as closed as they could be given the fact that we haven't had, quote, comprehensive immigration reform. So Trump comes in 30 days, borders are closed. No credit for that. No one even mentions that anymore. Ukraine war. President Trump pressures our allies into reimbursing us for everything we spend on that war going forward. No one even talks about the war anymore because no longer are we on the hook for any money. So let's not discuss that anymore. Eggs were a huge deal in the campaign. Price of eggs fallen dramatically. No one talks about eggs anymore. Gas prices, 4-year low. Let's not talk about gas prices anymore. Inflation over the first 9 months, 10 months, 2.4%. Under the 3% that people thought it might hit. Jobs report just came out. The expectation was 50,000. It was 119,000. And then there's Thanksgiving. Walmart, typical Thanksgiving dinner, down 25% from last year. Any credit for any of that? Crime down in major cities. Why? In part because of what Donald Trump is doing, rounding up violent, criminal, illegal aliens. Part of it is Donald Trump using the National Guard in places like Washington, D.C. and Memphis. Part of it is the threat of using the National Guard. So therefore, these mayors and council persons have gotten off their butts and now doing their jobs so that they aren't embarrassed by Trump deploying the National Guard. Is this man going to get credit for any of all this? The release of the hostages? Any credit for any of this? Nothing? $19 trillion in funds promised to be invested here by foreign countries? Any credit for any of this? Any of this? It's called Trump derangement syndrome, and maybe, just maybe, Trump set an example today in the Oval Office.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.